Admiral Thomas Tank Morrison had seen enough combat in his 30-year career to fill several lifetimes. The decorated Navy SEAL had led countless missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified locations around the globe. His chest bore the weight of medals that told stories of courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood. But now, at 58, his body carried different stories, ones written in shattered bone and torn ligaments from an IED explosion that had ended his active duty 6 months earlier. The morning air was crisp as Tank made his way down the hospital corridor, his aluminum crutches clicking against the polished floor with each labored step. The Walter Reed National Military Medical Center had become his second home, a place where heroes came to rebuild themselves piece by piece. His right leg, held together by titanium rods and surgical pins, protested with every movement. The doctors had been blunt. He would walk again, but it would take time, patience, and more physical therapy than he cared to endure. Tank paused outside the physical therapy wing, gathering his strength and his pride. Inside that room, he would once again confront his limitations, his reduced capabilities, and the harsh reality that the man who had once carried wounded soldiers to safety now struggled to carry himself. He pushed through the double doors, the familiar smell of antiseptic and determination greeting him like an old friend. The therapy room buzzed with activity. Wounded warriors of various ages and ranks worked through their exercises, each fighting their own private war against disability and despair. Tank spotted his usual therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, across the room. But today someone else approached him, a young woman in scrubs who couldn't have been more than 25. "Admiral Morrison?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. "I'm Sarah. Dr. Rodriguez had a family emergency, so I'll be working with you today." Tank studied her face, noting the earnest brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the way she carried herself with quiet professionalism. She was small in stature, probably no more than 5 feet 4 inches, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Just Tank is fine," he replied gruffly, already missing the familiarity of his regular therapist. Sarah smiled, seemingly unbothered by his brusque tone. "Tank it is. I've reviewed your case file and your progress notes. You've been working hard, but I can see you're frustrated with the pace of recovery." He appreciated that she didn't sugarcoat the situation or offer empty platitudes about patience and positive thinking. Too many well-meaning medical staff had tried that approach, not understanding that a man accustomed to excellence doesn't easily accept limitation. "Let's start with some basic mobility work," Sarah suggested, positioning herself beside him. "I want you to walk the length of this mat, but don't think about speed or form. Just focus on taking one step at a time." As Tank began his walk, Sarah moved alongside him, not hovering or rushing to assist, but maintaining a presence that somehow felt both professional and protective. Halfway across the mat, his right leg buckled slightly, a momentary lapse in strength that sent a spike of pain shooting through his knee. Before he could react, Sarah was there, not catching him in a way that would embarrass his pride, but simply providing a steady point of contact that allowed him to regain his balance. Her positioning was perfect, her response instant and intuitive. It was the kind of situational awareness that couldn't be taught in medical school. "You've done this before," Tank observed, studying her face more carefully. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but he caught a flicker of something in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, or acknowledgement of an unspoken truth. "Done what?" she asked, helping him complete the walk to the end of the mat. "Helped someone walk who didn't want to be helped." She guided him to a nearby chair, kneeling to examine his leg brace with practiced efficiency. "Most people who end up here don't want to be helped, Tank. It's not personal. It's pride." Over the next hour, Sarah put him through a series of exercises that were both challenging and achievable. She seemed to understand exactly how far to push without breaking his spirit or his body. Her knowledge of anatomy was impressive, but more than that, she demonstrated an understanding of the warrior mindset that surprised him. When she helped him with resistance training, her grip was firm and confident. When she guided him through balance exercises, her spotting technique was flawless. And when she offered encouragement, it came without pity or condescension, just one professional acknowledging another's effort. "You know, Tank said during a brief rest between exercises. You remind me of someone. Sarah paused in adjusting the resistance bands, her hands stilling for just a moment. Oh, a medic I knew. Had the same way of being there when you needed her, but never making you feel weak for needing the help. Sounds like a good medic, Sarah replied carefully. The best. Saved my life once, actually, and probably a dozen other guys over the years. Tank watched Sarah's face as he spoke, noting the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her breathing became more controlled. These were tells he had learned to read during decades of military service, signs that someone was working very hard to maintain their composure. As their session continued, Tank found himself studying Sarah more intently. There was something about her movements, her awareness of her surroundings, the way she positioned herself that spoke of training beyond physical therapy school. When a crash echoed from across the room, another patient dropping his weights, Sarah's head snapped toward the sound with the kind of instantaneous threat assessment that was drilled into military personnel. Where did you do your training? Tank asked casually as Sarah helped him with his final stretches. Various places, she replied, her answer deliberately vague. I've worked with military personnel before. Before here, you mean? Among other assignments. Tank recognized the evasion technique. Give just enough information to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything substantive. It was a skill taught in survival training, the art of seeming cooperative while maintaining operational security. As their session wound down, Tank felt stronger than he had in weeks, but not just physically. There was something about Sarah's presence that reminded him of the camaraderie he missed from active duty, the feeling of being understood by someone who had faced similar challenges. Same time next week? Sarah asked, making notes on his chart. Dr. Rodriguez will be back by then, Tank pointed out. Sarah looked up from her paperwork, meeting his eyes directly for the first time during their session. In that moment, Tank saw something that confirmed his growing suspicions, a depth of experience that belonged to someone much older, someone who had seen combat and carried its weight. Maybe, she said simply. But if he's not, you know where to find me. As Tank made his way out of the therapy room, his movement noticeably improved from when he had entered. He couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter had been more than coincidental. Sarah had handled him with the expertise of someone who understood not just physical rehabilitation, but the psychological challenges of recovering warriors. That evening, back in his temporary quarters, Tank found himself thinking about the young therapist. Her technique had been flawless, her understanding of his needs almost intuitive. But, more than that, there had been something in her eyes, a recognition that went beyond professional assessment. He pulled out his laptop and began searching through old mission reports and personnel files. If Sarah was who he suspected she might be, there would be records, commendations, perhaps even photos from their shared deployments. The military kept detailed records of everyone who served, especially those who had distinguished themselves in combat. As he scrolled through pages of data, Tank's mind wandered back to Afghanistan, to a dusty forward operating base where a young medic had earned the respect of every soldier in the unit. She had been fearless under fire, tireless in her dedication to wounded personnel, and absolutely committed to bringing everyone home alive. He remembered her hands, steady and sure as she worked to save lives under the most extreme conditions. Today, those same hands had guided him through his physical therapy with identical precision and care. The connection seemed impossible, but Tank had learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct told him that Sarah was more than she appeared to be. Outside his window, the lights of the medical center continued to burn as night fell over Walter Reed. Somewhere in that complex, Sarah was probably finishing her shift, preparing to go home to whatever life she had built for herself after military service. Tank wondered what had brought her here, what had led a decorated combat medic to become a civilian physical therapist working with wounded warriors. Tomorrow, he would continue his investigation. He would dig deeper into his memories and his records, searching for the truth about the quiet young woman who had helped him walk further than he had in months. But tonight, for the first time since his injury, Tank felt something he had almost forgotten, hope that his recovery might be more than just a return to basic function, but a journey back to the warrior he had always been. The story was just beginning, and Tank sensed that understanding Sarah's true identity would be as important to his healing as any exercise or therapy session. In the world of military medicine, there were no coincidences, only missions waiting to be discovered, and brothers and sisters in arms finding their way back to each other across time and circumstance. Tank couldn't sleep. The medication prescribed for his leg pain sat untouched on his nightstand as he spent hours hunched over his laptop, scrolling through military databases with the determination of a man on a mission. The digital glow illuminated his weathered features as he cross-referenced personnel files, medical unit rosters, and deployment records from his tours in Afghanistan between 2018 and 2020. The name that kept surfacing in his searches was Specialist Sarah Chun, 68W combat medic, assigned to Forward Operating Base Salerno during the exact time frame when Tank SEAL Team had conducted joint operations in the region. The official records were frustratingly sparse, typical for special operations collaborations where much of the documentation remained classified, but Tank's memory was filling in the gaps that bureaucracy left blank. He pulled up a grainy photograph from a unit commendation ceremony, zooming in on the faces of medical personnel lined up for recognition. There, in the back row, stood a young woman with familiar eyes behind military-issued glasses. The resolution was poor, but Tank felt his pulse quicken as he studied the image. The bone structure, the way she carried herself, even the slight tilt of her head, it all matched the therapist who had guided him through yesterday's session. Tank's fingers drummed against the laptop keyboard as fragmented memories began coalescing into a clearer picture. He remembered now why Specialist Chun had seemed so familiar during their first encounter in the therapy room. She hadn't just been any medic at FOB Salerno. She had been the medic who had quite literally saved his life during one of the most dangerous missions of his career. The incident had occurred during Operation Nightfall, a classified raid on a Taliban stronghold in the mountainous region near the Pakistani border. Tank's six-man SEAL team had been tasked with extracting a high-value target, but the intelligence had been compromised. What should have been a surgical strike had turned into a prolonged firefight when the team found themselves surrounded by enemy combatants in a narrow valley with limited escape routes. Tank closed his eyes and allowed himself to relive that terrible night in August 2019. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. The sharp crack of AK-47 rounds ricocheting off rocks, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with dust and sweat, and the searing pain that had torn through his abdomen when shrapnel from an RPG explosion had found its mark. He had been leading his team toward an extraction point when the attack had intensified. Tank remembered the moment his strength had failed him, the way his legs had buckled as blood loss and shock began to shut down his body systems. His team members were pinned down in their own defensive positions, unable to reach him as Taliban fighters pressed their advantage. That's when she had appeared, a slight figure in combat fatigues, moving with purpose across terrain that was being swept by enemy fire. Specialist Chun had somehow navigated through the chaos, using every available piece of cover to reach his position without being detected. Tank remembered thinking, even through his pain and disorientation, that her movement showed the kind of tactical awareness that exceeded her official training. "Stay with me, Admiral," she had whispered, her voice steady despite the bullets snapping overhead. "I've got you." Tank's laptop screen blurred as the memory intensified. He could still feel her hands working with swift efficiency to apply pressure bandages and establish an 4-line under impossible conditions. She had used her own body as a shield, positioning herself between Tank and the enemy fire while she worked to stabilize his wounds. Her medical bag had been perfectly organized, every supply exactly where she could find it without looking, even in the darkness. But it wasn't just her medical skill that had impressed him, it was her tactical judgment. While treating his wounds, Specialist Chun had simultaneously coordinated with Tank's team members via radio, providing real-time intelligence about enemy positions and suggesting repositioning strategies that revealed a deep understanding of small unit tactics. She hadn't just saved his life medically, she had helped orchestrate their entire team's extraction from an untenable position. Tank opened another file on his laptop, this one containing his own after-action report from Operation Nightfall. Reading his formal account of the mission, written weeks later from a hospital bed in Germany, he was struck by the clinical language he had used to describe events that had been anything but clinical in their intensity. Specialist Chun demonstrated exceptional courage and medical expertise under direct enemy fire, his report stated. Her actions directly contributed to the successful extraction of all team members despite being significantly outnumbered and outgunned. Recommend consideration for Bronze Star with Valor device. Tank frowned as he scrolled through the subsequent documents, looking for any record of the commendation he had recommended. Military bureaucracy was notorious for its paper trails, yet he couldn't find any indication that Specialist Chun had received the recognition she deserved. More puzzling still, her service record seemed to end abruptly in late 2019, with no clear indication of her subsequent assignments or discharge status. The next morning, Tank arrived at physical therapy early, hoping to catch Sarah before their scheduled session. He positioned himself in the waiting area where he could observe the staff entrance, watching each person who entered the medical wing. When Sarah finally appeared, carrying a coffee cup and a worn leather messenger bag, Tank studied her more carefully than he had the day before. She moved through the hallway with the same efficient grace he remembered from that night in Afghanistan. Never hurried, but always purposeful, with an awareness of her surroundings that suggested she was constantly processing potential threats and escape routes. When a loud crash echoed from the emergency department down the hall, Sarah's reaction was instantaneous. A slight crouch, a quick scan for the source of the sound, and a positioning of her body that would allow for rapid movement in any direction. "You're here early," Sarah observed as she approached, her tone neutral but her eyes alert. "Couldn't sleep," Tank replied honestly. "Had some things on my mind." Sarah nodded as if she understood exactly what kinds of things might keep a wounded warrior awake at night. She led him into the therapy room, but Tank noticed that she positioned them in a location that gave her clear sight lines to all entrances, another subtle indicator of training that went well beyond civilian medical education. As they began their session, Tank decided to test his theory more directly. "I was thinking about Afghanistan last night," he said casually while working through his balance exercises. Sarah's hands remained steady as she guided his movements, but Tank caught the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. "A lot of veterans think about their deployments," she replied carefully. This was specific. August 2019, FOB Salerno. "We had a medic there who really knew her business." Tank watched Sarah's reflection in the mirror that covered one wall of the therapy room. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, and he saw something raw and vulnerable in her expression, recognition, memory, and perhaps a touch of fear. "There were a lot of good medics downrange," Sarah said, her voice slightly tighter than before. "This one was special. Saved my life during a mission that went sideways." Tank paused in his exercises, turning to face her directly. She had this way of staying calm under pressure, like nothing could rattle her. "Reminded me a lot of you, actually." Sarah met his gaze steadily, but Tank could see the internal struggle playing out behind her eyes. She was weighing her options, calculating risks, deciding how much truth she could afford to reveal. "What happened to her?" Sarah asked quietly. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. According to the records I can access, she just disappeared from the system after that deployment. No transfer orders, no discharge paperwork, no forwarding assignment. Almost like she never existed." Sarah turned away, ostensibly to retrieve some equipment, but Tank suspected she was buying time to compose herself. When she faced him again, her professional demeanor was firmly back in place. "Sometimes people need to disappear," she said simply. "Because of what they saw, what they did, because of what was done to them." The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Tank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning system. In the world of special operations, there were many reasons why good soldiers might need to disappear. Witness protection, classified reassignments, or darker possibilities involving betrayal and cover-ups. Their therapy session continued in relative silence, but Tank could feel the tension radiating from Sarah like heat from a fire. She maintained her professional competence, but there was a wariness in her movements now, a hypervigilance that suggested she was preparing for some form of threat. As they worked through the final exercises, Tank made a decision that would either confirm his suspicions or potentially drive Sarah away forever. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small military challenge coin, a bronze medallion bearing the insignia of his SEAL team. He had carried it through every deployment, a talisman that connected him to his brothers in arms. I want you to have this, Tank said, offering the coin to Sarah. She stared at the medallion without taking it, her face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. I can't accept that. It's too valuable. It belonged to someone who earned it. Someone who saved my life and the lives of my team members when we had no right to expect salvation. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she finally reached for the coin. When her fingers closed around the metal, Tank saw tears gathering in her eyes, the first crack in the armor she had built around herself. You don't understand, she whispered. Then, help me understand. Sarah looked around the therapy room as if checking for surveillance, then stepped closer to Tank, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That mission you mentioned, Operation Nightfall. When we got back to base, there were questions. People wanted to know how a medic had acquired the kind of tactical knowledge I demonstrated that night. They started digging into my background, my training, my family connections. Tank felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. What did they find? Things that made them nervous. Things that made them question whether I could be trusted with what I had seen and done. Sarah, that's not my real name, she interrupted. I've been Sarah Chun for almost 5 years now. Before that, I was someone else entirely. Someone who apparently knew too much for their own good. Tank stared at the young woman who had saved his life, seeing her now not just as a skilled medic, but as a fellow warrior who had been betrayed by the very system they had both sworn to serve. The challenge coin remained clutched in her fist, its bronze surface warming against her palm. What do you need from me? Tank asked, his voice carrying the weight of military brotherhood and shared sacrifice. I need you to stop looking, Sarah said, though her tone suggested it was the last thing she actually wanted. I need you to let me remain invisible. But Tank Morrison hadn't become a Navy SEAL admiral by backing down from difficult missions. If anything, Sarah's revelation had only strengthened his resolve to uncover the truth about what had happened to her after that night in Afghanistan. Someone had forced a decorated combat medic to assume a false identity and hide among the wounded warriors she continued to serve. That injustice demanded investigation, and Tank was exactly the right person to pursue it. As Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to end their session, Tank made a silent promise. He would continue his search, but he would be more careful about it. Whatever had driven Sarah into hiding was serious enough to require ongoing protection, and Tank would provide it. She had saved his life once. Now it was his turn to save hers. Tank's investigation took on a new urgency after Sarah's partial confession, but now he had to proceed with the stealth and precision of the covert operations that had defined his military career. He couldn't risk exposing Sarah to whatever forces had driven her into hiding, which meant operating through unofficial channels and calling upon debts accumulated over 3 decades of military service. His first contact was Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a former SEAL who now worked in personnel records management at the Pentagon. Rodriguez owed Tank his life from a mission in Syria where Tank had carried him 4 miles through hostile territory with a shattered femur. Such debts in the special operations community were never forgotten and always honored. I need you to look into something for me, Tank said during a carefully encrypted phone call. But this has to stay completely off the books. Rodriguez's response was immediate and unquestioning. What do you need? Everything you can find on a combat medic named Chun, first name possibly Sarah, deployed to FOB Salerno in 2019. But, Chief, this is sensitive. If anyone asks, we never had this conversation. Roger that. Give me 48 hours. While waiting for Rodriguez's intelligence, Tank continued his physical therapy sessions with Sarah, but their interactions had evolved into a delicate dance of mutual awareness. She maintained her professional demeanor while he pretended not to notice the way she systematically varied their meeting times and locations within the medical facility. She was practicing operational security without even realizing it, following patterns ingrained during her military service. Tank also began to notice other things about Sarah that confirmed his growing suspicions about the danger she faced. She never ate in the hospital cafeteria, always bringing lunch from home in a brown bag that she kept with her at all times. She parked in different locations each day and always positioned her car facing outward for quick escape. Most tellingly, she wore her hair differently each session, sometimes pulled back, sometimes loose, sometimes braided, classic counter-surveillance techniques designed to make identification more difficult. During one particularly intense therapy session, Tank decided to probe deeper into Sarah's story. As she guided him through complex mobility exercises, he shared carefully selected details from his own military experience, watching for her reactions and responses. The hardest part about coming home, Tank mused while working on his balance beam routine, isn't the physical wounds. It's the feeling that the people who sent you downrange don't have your back when things go wrong. Sarah's movements faltered almost imperceptibly. What makes you say that? I've seen good soldiers hung out to dry because they became inconvenient. Politics, bureaucracy, career preservation, it all matters more than the people who actually do the fighting. Sometimes the system protects itself at the expense of individuals, Sarah agreed quietly. And sometimes individuals have to protect themselves when the system fails them. Sarah stopped the exercise entirely, turning to face Tank with an expression that mixed hope and terror. How much do you really know? Enough to understand that you're in danger, not enough to know how to help you. Before Sarah could respond, Tank's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Rodriguez. The text was brief, but ominous. Found your medic. Need to meet in person. Trust no one. Tank's blood ran cold. In special operations parlance, trust no one was code for compromised communications and active surveillance. Whatever Rodriguez had discovered was serious enough to warrant extreme operational security measures. I have to go, Tank announced abruptly, grabbing his crutches and moving toward the exit with more speed than his injured leg should have allowed. Tank, wait, don't be here alone, he warned over his shoulder. If anyone asks about me, tell them I wasn't feeling well, and cut the session short. Tank's mind raced as he made his way to the parking garage. Rodriguez had suggested a meeting location through their coded communication system, a diner in Arlington where they had met before during Tank's active duty years. The fact that Rodriguez wanted a face-to-face meeting rather than communicating through secure channels meant the information he had uncovered was too sensitive for any electronic transmission. The drive to Arlington gave Tank time to consider the implications of what he might learn. If Sarah was indeed Specialist Chun from Operation Nightfall, and if something had gone wrong after that mission, then Tank himself might have inadvertently played a role in whatever danger she now faced. His after-action report had specifically highlighted her exceptional performance and tactical knowledge, details that might have drawn unwanted attention from people with their own agendas. Rodriguez was waiting in a corner booth at the diner, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious tension. Tank noted that his old friend had positioned himself with clear sight lines to all exits and was wearing civilian clothes that didn't match his usual style, indicators that he too was operating under heightened security protocols. What did you find? Tank asked without preamble as he slid into the opposite side of the booth. Rodriguez glanced around the nearly empty restaurant before pulling out a manila folder that he kept partially concealed beneath the table. Your specialist chin doesn't exist. Never did. What do you mean? The personnel record you found? It's a fabrication. Well constructed, inserted into the official database with the right supporting documentation, but fake nonetheless. Whoever created it had serious access to military systems. Tank felt his stomach drop. Then who is she? Rodriguez opened the folder carefully, revealing a photograph that made Tank's breath catch in his throat. The image showed a young woman in army dress uniform, but her name tape read Valdez rather than Chun. Meet Lieutenant Maria Elena Valdez, former military intelligence officer with top-secret clearance and specialized training in psychological operations. She was assigned to Task Force Orange, a classified unit that conducted deep cover operations in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Tank studied the photograph, noting details that confirmed what he had already suspected. The bone structure, the eyes, the way she carried herself. It was definitely Sarah, but the uniform and insignia told a very different story than the one she had been living for the past 5 years. Task Force Orange was disbanded in late 2019, Rodriguez continued, after their operations were compromised by someone within the intelligence community. 3 officers from the unit died in what were officially classified as separate accidents. 2 others disappeared entirely. Let me guess. Lieutenant Valdez was one of the ones who disappeared. Officially, yes. Unofficially, the Army created the Sarah Chun identity and placed her in the witness protection program while they investigated the security breaches that had led to the task force's exposure. Tank processed this information, understanding now why Sarah had seemed so familiar during their first meeting. She hadn't just been a combat medic who happened to be in the right place at the right time during Operation Nightfall. She had been a highly trained intelligence officer conducting her own classified mission in the same area where Tank's team was operating. The investigation stalled, Rodriguez continued. No prosecutions, no definitive answers about who compromised the task force. But someone in the intelligence community decided that Lieutenant Valdez knew too much about the operation and the people involved. Her handlers and witness protection were told to keep her hidden indefinitely. That was 5 years ago, Tank pointed out, which is why this gets complicated. According to my sources, someone has been asking questions about Sarah Chin's current location. Quiet inquiries through official channels, but persistent enough to raise flags with the people responsible for her security. Tank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning. Who's asking? That's what we can't determine. The inquiries are coming through legitimate government agencies, but they're being routed in ways that obscure their true origin. Could be foreign intelligence, could be domestic actors, could be someone within our own military trying to tie up loose ends. Rodriguez closed the folder and slid it across the table to Tank. What I can tell you is that her protection detail was quietly withdrawn 6 months ago. Budget cuts, they said, but the timing suggests someone wanted her exposed. Tank stared at the folder containing the truth about Sarah's identity, understanding now the full scope of the danger she faced. She wasn't just a former combat medic trying to start a new life. She was a decorated intelligence officer who possessed knowledge that powerful people wanted to remain buried. There's something else, Rodriguez added quietly. The reason she was at FOB Salerno during your operation wasn't coincidental. Task Force Orange had intelligence suggesting that your mission was being monitored by hostile forces. Lieutenant Valdez was there specifically to provide security and extraction support if things went wrong. Which they did. And her intervention probably saved not just your life, but prevented your entire team from being captured or killed in an ambush that had been planned weeks in advance. Tank felt the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Sarah, Maria, had saved his life not as a medic responding to an emergency, but as an intelligence officer executing a mission to protect his team from threats they hadn't even known existed. Her tactical knowledge, her positioning, her ability to coordinate their extraction, it all made sense now. She needs protection, Tank said firmly. She needs to disappear again, properly this time. And she needs someone she can trust to help make that happen. Tank thought about the young woman who had been helping him walk again, who had maintained her cover even while providing him with the best physical therapy he had received since his injury. She had been protecting him from her own dangerous situation while he unknowingly investigated her past and potentially exposed her to new threats. I need to warn her, Tank said, standing up from the booth. Tank, Rodriguez grabbed his arm. If you contact her directly, you could be putting both of you in more danger. These people, whoever they are, might be watching you too now. Then, what do you suggest? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, weighing operational considerations against personal loyalty. Give me another 24 hours. I have contacts in the intelligence community who might be able to provide her with new protection or a new identity. In the meantime, maintain normal contact, but don't indicate that you know anything about her real situation. Tank nodded, understanding the tactical wisdom of Rodriguez's advice even as every instinct told him to rush back to Walter Reed and warn Sarah immediately. She had saved his life once, and now he had the opportunity to save hers, but only if he proceeded with the same careful planning and execution that had characterized his most successful military operations. As Tank drove back toward the medical center, he reflected on the profound irony of his situation. He had spent months focused on his own recovery, his own limitations, his own struggle to return to the warrior he had once been. Now he discovered that his path to healing had led him to someone who needed rescue more than he needed therapy. The quiet rookie who had helped him walk was actually a decorated intelligence officer hiding in plain sight, serving wounded warriors while she herself remained wounded by betrayal and abandonment. Tomorrow, Tank would begin the most important mission of his career, not to take a life or destroy a target, but to save someone who had already saved him, even when he didn't know he needed saving. Tank arrived at Walter Reed the following morning with a plan that combined military precision with the kind of calculated risk-taking that had defined his most successful operations. He had spent the night coordinating with Rodriguez and a carefully selected network of former Special Operations personnel who owed their lives to Tank's leadership over the years. If they were going to extract Maria, he still thought of her as Sarah. From her current situation, it would require the same level of planning and execution as any high-stakes military operation. The first phase involved establishing secure communications. Tank had arranged for Rodriguez to position himself in the hospital's visitor parking area with electronic surveillance equipment designed to detect any monitoring devices that might be tracking Sarah's movements or communications. If hostile actors were indeed closing in on her location, they would likely be employing sophisticated surveillance techniques. Tank found Sarah in the physical therapy wing, working with another patient, a young Marine who had lost his left arm in an IED explosion in Syria. Tank observed her technique, noting once again the way she combined medical expertise with an intuitive understanding of warrior psychology. She was helping the Marine work through not just his physical limitations, but the emotional challenges of accepting a dramatically altered future. "He's lucky to have you," Tank commented as Sarah finished her session with the Marine. "We're all lucky to have each other," Sarah replied. But Tank caught the weariness in her voice. The strain of maintaining her false identity while constantly watching for threats was clearly taking its toll. As they began Tank's session, he decided it was time to reveal what he had learned, despite Rodriguez's advice to maintain normal contact. Sarah deserved to know that her situation had potentially become more dangerous, and Tank needed her cooperation if they were going to successfully relocate her to safety. "I know who you are," Tank said quietly as they moved to a private corner of the therapy room. Sarah's hands stilled on the resistance bands she had been adjusting. "I don't know what you mean." "Lieutenant Maria Elena Valdez, Task Force Orange, Military Intelligence. You saved my life during Operation Nightfall not as a medic, but as an intelligence officer protecting my team from an ambush you knew was coming." Sarah's professional mask cracked, revealing the fear and exhaustion she had been hiding for years. "How did you?" "I have friends in places that matter. The same friends who just informed me that someone has been making inquiries about your current location. Your protection has been compromised, Maria. You're not safe here anymore." The use of her real name seemed to break through the last of her defenses. Sarah, Maria, sank into a nearby chair, the weight of years of hiding and hypervigilance finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. "I've been waiting for this day for 5 years, she whispered. "Waiting for them to find me, waiting for it all to catch up with me. I thought maybe I could have a normal life, help people, make something good out of all the terrible things I've seen and done." Tank positioned himself between Maria and the rest of the therapy room, using his body to shield their conversation from potential observation. "What exactly did Task Force Orange uncover that made you so dangerous?" Maria looked around nervously before responding. "We discovered that someone within the U.S. intelligence community was selling operational information to foreign actors, not just general intelligence, but specific mission details that were getting American soldiers killed. The compromised operations weren't random failures. They were orchestrated betrayals." "How high up did the corruption go?" "Higher than anyone wanted to acknowledge. We had evidence implicating at least 3 flag-level officers and an unknown number of civilian defense contractors. The kind of evidence that would have ended careers, triggered congressional investigations, and potentially exposed decades of compromised operations." Tank felt his anger building as the scope of the betrayal became clear. Maria had been hidden away not to protect her from foreign enemies, but to prevent her from exposing domestic corruption that reached into the highest levels of the military establishment. "The other members of your task force, the ones who died in accidents." "Murdered," Maria said flatly. "Julie Morrison died in a car crash when her brakes failed on a straight stretch of highway. Captain Rodriguez drowned during a routine training exercise despite being an expert swimmer. Lieutenant Thompson was killed in a supposed random mugging that took nothing from his wallet but left him dead in an alley." Tank's phone buzzed with a message from Rodriguez. 2 vehicles with government plates circling hospital. "Time to go. We need to leave now," Tank announced, abandoning any pretense of continuing their therapy session. "I can't just disappear from work," Maria protested. "There are patients depending on me, procedures to follow. The procedures that matter now are the ones that will keep you alive," Tank interrupted. "In 10 minutes, people are going to come looking for you, and they won't be interested in a conversation." Tank's military training took over as he guided Maria through the hospital's service corridors, avoiding main thoroughfares where they might be observed or intercepted. Rodriguez had provided him with detailed floor plans of Walter Reed, identifying multiple exit routes and potential safe rooms where they could take temporary shelter if pursuit became imminent. As they moved through the labyrinthine medical facility, Tank explained the extraction plan he had coordinated with his network of former Special Operations personnel. "There's a safe house in Virginia Beach run by a former Delta Force operator named Jackson. He specializes in providing security for people who need to disappear from hostile governments, not just foreign ones." "What about my life here? My job, my apartment, my identity as Sarah Chun?" "All of that was compromised the moment someone started looking for you. Sarah Chun died the moment I confirmed your real identity. Because if I could find you through official records, so can people with much more resources and fewer scruples." They reached a service exit that opened onto a loading dock where Rodriguez was waiting with an unmarked van. Tank noted with approval that his old friend had positioned the vehicle for immediate departure and was constantly scanning their surroundings for potential threats. "2-minute warning," Rodriguez announced as they approached. Black SUVs with federal plates just pulled into the main parking area. "Professional surveillance team, definitely not hospital security." Tank helped Maria into the van, while Rodriguez conducted final sweeps for electronic tracking devices. The next phase of their operation would take them to a small airfield outside Washington, where a former Navy pilot named Thompson was waiting with a private aircraft. Thompson owed Tank his life from a mission in Iraq where Tank had personally extracted him from a crashed helicopter under heavy fire. As Rodriguez drove through the Virginia countryside, Tank used encrypted communications to coordinate with Jackson at the safe house. The conversation was conducted in military shorthand that would be meaningless to anyone intercepting their transmissions. "Package is secure and en route," Tank reported. "ETA 30 minutes. Request full hospitality suite preparation." "Roger that," Jackson responded. "Hospitality suite is prepared with all amenities. Extended stay accommodations available as needed." Maria listened to the coded conversation with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "How many people are you involving in this operation?" "As many as necessary," Tank replied. "The military teaches you a lot about warfare and tactics, but the most important thing it teaches you is loyalty. Every person helping us today is someone whose life was saved by another member of our community. That's how brotherhood works. We take care of our own, especially when the system fails to do it." The safe house turned out to be a sprawling farmhouse surrounded by 30 acres of rural Virginia landscape. Jackson, a bear of a man with graying hair and arms covered in tattoos commemorating various deployments, met them at the door with the kind of professional assessment that Tank recognized from decades of working with elite operators. "Ma'am," Jackson said to Maria with military formality, "welcome to your new temporary home. We've prepared secure communications, clean identity documents, and transportation options for wherever you decide to go next." Over the following hours, Tank watched as Maria transformed back into the confident intelligence officer she had been before years of hiding had worn down her spirit. Jackson's team provided her with detailed briefings on various relocation options, new identities in countries that didn't extradite to the United States, connections to international organizations that specialized in protecting government whistleblowers, and safe havens within the United States where she could continue serving wounded veterans under proper protection. "There's something else you should consider," Tank said as they reviewed her options. "Your knowledge of that corruption investigation. That information is still valuable. There are people in Congress, in the Inspector General's office, in investigative journalism who could use what you know to finally expose the people responsible for getting American soldiers killed." Maria was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks of speaking out against the safety of continued hiding. "If I testify, if I provide evidence, they'll never stop hunting me." "Maybe," Tank acknowledged. "But they're already hunting you now, and at least if you speak out, you'll be hunting them back." The decision ultimately came down to the same choice that defined every warrior's career, whether to retreat from a dangerous mission or press forward despite the risks. Maria had spent 5 years in hiding, watching from the sidelines as the corruption she had uncovered continued to endanger American military personnel around the world. Set up a meeting, Maria decided. I want to talk to someone who can guarantee protection and prosecution in exchange for my testimony. Tank smiled for the first time since beginning his investigation. The quiet rookie who had helped him walk was revealing herself to be exactly the kind of warrior he had always suspected her to be. Someone who would risk everything to do what was right, even when doing right was dangerous. 6 months later, Tank stood in a congressional hearing room watching Maria, now testifying under her real name, provide detailed evidence of the corruption that had compromised American military operations for nearly a decade. The investigation her testimony triggered had already resulted in 3 arrests and the forced retirement of 2 general officers. Tank's own recovery had progressed remarkably during those months, aided not just by physical therapy, but by the sense of purpose that came from successfully completing a mission that mattered. He was walking without assistance now, preparing to return to active duty in a training capacity that would allow him to share his experience with the next generation of special operations personnel. After the hearing, Tank and Maria walked together down the steps of the Capitol building. She had accepted a position with a veterans advocacy organization that provided legal protection for military whistleblowers, work that allowed her to continue serving the warrior community while remaining in the public eye where additional attempts to silence her would be much more difficult. Thank you, Maria said as they reached the street. For everything. For remembering. For investigating. For taking the risk to help me. You saved my life first, Tank replied. I just returned the favor. No, Maria corrected him. You saved my life twice. Once by remembering who I really was, and once by helping me remember who I could still become. As they parted ways, Tank returning to Walter Reed to continue his own recovery, and Maria heading to her new office to begin the work of protecting other whistleblowers. Both carried with them the knowledge that their chance encounter had evolved into something much more significant than physical therapy. The quiet rookie had indeed helped a veteran walk again. But, in discovering her true identity, the SEAL Admiral had done something equally important. He had helped a fellow warrior find her way home to the person she had always been meant to be. In the end, they had both learned that true healing comes not just from recovering what was lost, but from discovering what was possible when courage meets opportunity and warriors choose to take care of their own.